encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. If you want to be a serious Bible student, a successful servant, and a powerful preacher, this is the podcast for you. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. My name is Robert Hatfield, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things preaching and ministry. This episode of Preachers in Training is sponsored by ETBN, the Eternal Truth Broadcast Network. ETBN, a new Christian broadcast network, invites you to join them for their inaugural live broadcast election coverage of the Tennessee state primary election tonight, August 6th, 2020. Join them on YouTube, Facebook, or online at etbntv.com. Hello and welcome to Season 12, Episode 1 of Preachers in Training, and we're really excited for this season. We have a lot of wonderful content that is upcoming, including some additional content, especially for these times. We'll get into some of that for our episode today, in fact, in just a moment. Thanks for sticking with us for our break. We take a break every summer for the months of June and July and always begin back on the first Thursday of the month of the first full week of August, and that's where we are today. On this episode, we're talking about being a full-time preacher with a side gig. That's the way that our listener requested this subject. And here to help me do this, I'm so excited, I always look forward to working with him, is Paul Sain, joining us from Sain Publications in Pulaski, Tennessee. Welcome back, Paul. How you doing today?
Doing mighty fine, and I can't hardly believe that this is season 12.
I can't either.
Time flies by, unbelievable. I remember even the first season and some of the things through the years that you've done. It's been absolutely awesome. But I've got a question. Preachers in Training, is that me too?
Well, over the years, what I've learned is that everybody seems to be able to identify with the title. What do you think?
I absolutely believe that for certain. And that was not actually a question, but more of a statement. I've been preaching for 50 plus years, and truly, we never, ever should stop training, improving, working to be the best that we can be.
Wonderful. Yep. Well, that's the goal of this podcast. I've been practicing at it for 13 years, and Paul's been practicing at it a little bit longer than that.
I'd rather not talk maybe a whole lot about it, but let's see. I was 15 when I tried to preach the first time, and that was 58 or 9 years ago.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's scary.
Yeah, that is cool. Almost 60 years?
Yeah, I started in 1961, I believe it was.
Wow. Okay. That's great. Well, of course, our listeners may remember, Paul's been on before, that Paul and I had the privilege of working alongside and under the tutelage of Paul at the church in Pulaski, Tennessee for about 7 years. And, of course, grew up there. And so I've been sort of learning from Paul my whole life and always look forward to times when we can work together. Thanks for being on today.
It was a two-way street, Robert, and I say that not just because I'm speaking to you, but to others that are listening as well. I mean, when two people have the same goal of serving the Master and working for the Lord, spreading the kingdom every way we possibly can, I remember with such great warmth of heart the many times that you'd come down the hall and sit in the office, or I'd go down the hall and sit in your office, and we would just batter back and forth and brainstorm together and think out loud. And I can't help but believe that some of it did some good. But I remember one time in particular, maybe you do as well.
We're telling stories. Oh no.
When we were, I think it was planning for one of the lectureships, the Truth and Love lectureship. And we sat there and we just started scribbling notes, and I had an idea, and then you had an idea, and back and forth, and we just kept building on it.
Yes.
And the skeleton, at least, was put together in a matter of just a few 15 to 30 minute time. And we were even, I think, surprised at what we were able to accomplish that particular day
Yeah.
between the two minds being blended together.
I don't know what we could attribute that to back then. I didn't drink coffee at the time, and you never have, so I don't know.
Sun drops.
Sun drop, that's right.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, all the caffeine that's in the sun drops, and we probably had a double dose that morning.
I'm sure we did. The term side gig is a term that our listener requested, being a full-time preacher with a side gig. And that's open to some interpretation, as most of our listener requests are. And so we try real hard to sort of make the episode be what we think the listener wanted it to be. We're going to talk about it, I guess, from multiple perspectives. I guess that you can have a side gig that is maybe of a more spiritual nature, and so it's still kind of productive for the kingdom, so to speak. And then on the other side, you can have a side gig that may be just a little more material or of a physical nature, and it can be productive for the kingdom, but only in the sense that it provides somewhat of a retreat for you, the preacher, or maybe it helps to make ends meet where there are maybe some other portions of life in terms of income that may be lacking some. We want to sort of flesh all this out a little bit, but part of the reason, Paul, why I thought of you for this subject is because you have somewhat of a side gig, wouldn't you say?
I would say it didn't start out that way, actually. It started out as a hobby.
Yeah.
My dad had published some sermon charts and outline books back in the 1950s when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years of age. And I would help after school come in, and we would actually work in the assembling, the stapling, the trimming of those books. And kind of got it in my blood, I suppose. I started what is now known as Sain Publications back in 1970. It's been 50 years that has been kind of an ongoing thing. Started out very small, just as I said, a hobby, something that I wanted to do, and publish some books, maybe some things for my dad as well. And then it has blossomed into something that I never dreamed it would be as large as it is. At one point, we were doing 50 to 60 books a year, lectureship books for colleges or churches and brotherhood lectureships, etc., as well as those for Brother Holland, Brother Taylor, Brother Elkins, Brother Cates, etc., Brother Claiborne. Never dreamed that I would be into it in that way. But let me even maybe pause for a second, though, and say, in 1968, I believe it was, we were living in northern Alabama. My wife and I had only been married 4 years, and we were, I can't say poor because we were rich in so many different ways, but we didn't have very much money. So I started driving a school bus, and that was motivated primarily because we just needed a little bit more income to be able to survive, to even try to pay our bills, etc. So it's kind of a side gig. Through the years, I've known of various other ones that maybe have worked in computer repair or setup or things of that nature. Maybe some that have actually had a large garden and sold produce at the end of it. Maybe it was woodworking. I've got a good preacher brother friend not too far from me right now that's making some awesome woodworking pieces, selling them for additional income. So it kind of comes down to the reason behind the gig or the additional work. Sometimes it is just mandatory to do so for a little bit more income. I wish that were not the case, and I'm not trying to lobby for preachers and their salaries, but at the same time, there's some preachers I know that really are not paid adequately, and they need to be greater consideration by the leadership there. But that's necessary. Sometimes, though, maybe the reason is recreational, just to kind of get away, take a break. I mean, just get out and flush the mind and enjoy doing things of a hobby nature, a gig nature. So it may be the family. Maybe we want to just be with our family and we go camping or we go hiking or whatever it may be. And technically that takes us away, and it's kind of an additional gig as well. So a lot of different areas that might take us away from the local work per se for a brief time.
One of the things I've always appreciated about you, watching you juggle Sain Publications and of course ministry, is that you've always said that that preaching and the local work comes first. That can be a difficult balance, and it's sort of a seasonal kind of thing, right? I mean, it may be that the side gig has seasons that are particularly intense, and then local work has seasons that are particularly intense, and those rare times that both seem to be particularly intense. You have any thoughts or anything you want to elaborate on that? Just keeping preaching and making sure that the local work takes the priority in our minds.
If we're going to step into the shoes of the local preacher, if we're going to take on the daunting task of trying to feed a spiritual family from the pulpit or from Bible classes, if we're going to accept that challenge, we've got to make sure and make the main thing the main thing. We cannot lose sight of that. And whatever we might branch into or take on or maybe enjoy doing, we've got to make positive that when I step or you step into the pulpit, when I am ready to teach a class, that I have prepared adequately and that I have not allowed anything else to distract me from stepping there and being prepared to feed that flock. For an example, I mean, it may very well be that a particular season, as you mentioned a moment ago, time of the year, and if it's sports related, maybe a preacher wants to be an umpire at the softball or the little league or whatever it may be level in the local community. And that's a great thing because that puts him out among the people. So there's some benefits, even if you're doing that type of thing. But late nights, multiple nights in a week's time, and all of a sudden you can easily be caught on a Saturday evening, even not ready with a sermon, not ready with a Bible class that you're going to step there and show them that you've got something that you can teach and that you can say that's going to be worthy of their time and blessing to their life. We got to be careful no matter what we take on, whether it's fun or whether it's just financial or whatever it may be, that it does not get in the way of the main thing.
And you don't want to be, I mean, every preacher, right, has those weeks where, just the sermon just didn't get done. I remember naively thinking that, it would be all about the sermon. And, I knew other things would come up, but I remember thinking, well, the sermon would really take the majority of the week. And boy, it didn't take me very long to realize that's not exactly the way that things work. People say, what do preachers do all day? And it's like, well, how long you got? I'll tell you a little bit. But, we all have those weeks for the Saturday night special, as we might call it. But, boy, when the side gig starts to sort of take us away from that. And by the way, we've had other episodes about what we might call bivocational preachers, right? Preachers who basically have the two full-time jobs. And we're assuming that's not what we're really talking about here, just because the nature of the request, side gig. But I guess we don't want to make it where a hobby or some kind of pursuit that maybe isn't essential takes so much of the focus on a consistent basis that the sermons or maybe even the visits or whatever other kind of ministry is really suffering, right?
Absolutely correct. Consider for a moment, as far as like you were saying, the Saturday thing, there's times, weeks, for an example, I recall, it hasn't really been that long ago, we had like 3 or 4 deaths in 1 week's time.
Wow.
And if you go see and spend time with the people from the standpoint of encouraging and trying to build them up and let them know that you really care about them, a whole family does, it's going to take some time to be out of the office and with them. And then you magnify that by 2 or 3 occurrences of that in the same week. And that week, I remember vividly coming to the Saturday, and I had not planned the sermons as thoroughly as I really like to do so and try to do so even now. I try to plan my sermons 3, 4, 6 weeks out and at least have the skeleton there. But I hadn't done that time. And all of a sudden I was scratching and just clamoring for anything that I could put together that would at least make it look like I had prepared a little bit more, not deceptively, but just to give the folks something, some food to to chew on spiritually in that Sunday, I realized that even though I might have been doing some good things, I still needed to put the main thing as the main thing.
Hmm.
I needed to make sure that I approached Sunday reverently and prepared to be able to teach. I have that responsibility, and that's first and foremost.
Mhm.
And that really taught me more, I believe, in that 1 week's time about planning a sermon and sermon planning per se,
Mhm.
weeks at a time, than anything else.
Mm.
You may remember, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago at PTP, they asked me to speak on planning your sermons for 2 years out.
Yeah.
And that is still available on a PDF from anyone that might want to have a copy of it.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I still have that. I sort of keep it tucked away in the little folder that I use to plan my sermons because Paul listed a bunch of topics, things. I think you sort of did a survey, right, of multiple preachers and said
Yes,
what needs to be covered in a period of 2 years at a local congregation.
I think there was about 40 altogether that contributed to help kind of compile that. It wasn't original, all of it was me at all, but
Mhm.
kind of a composition of this is what I do, this is how I do it, and so forth, and put it together. I think it's about, I don't know, 35, 50 page, 30,
Mhm.
40 page little booklet.
Well, it's super helpful, even to sort of look back in retrospect, and you're sort of walking down. You say, "Oh, it has been a while since I've addressed that subject. I need to work that in immediately." That kind of thing, too, almost retroactively and proactively.
Exactly. This past Sunday, Robert, you'll find it interesting in light of what we're talking about. I stood in the pulpit at Cedar Grove down in Rogersville, and I said, okay, what I'm about to preach is something I don't remember ever preaching a full length sermon on it. And it's not something that I would do once a year. In fact, I've been at Cedar Grove now 5 years, and this is the first time that I spoke on the subject of Satan,
Oh.
his origin, his mission, his destiny,
Hmm.
exactly more what the Bible has to say about our adversary. But the whole counsel of God is what Paul said he wanted to declare, and we've got to do that same thing and cross-reference some of those subjects that maybe we have never spoken of and on in maybe several years of working with a particular place.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. So we don't want the side gig to become something that overshadows the main thing. We don't want that hobby to turn into this full scale business. There's another aspect of the side gig that sort of comes up in my mind, and that is the congregation's perception of whatever this side gig might be. And let's start with the elders. What do you suggest as far as being up front with the elders? Do you kind of share with them what's going on, even the reasonings behind it? I can kind of see both sides of this argument. On the one hand, it's my finances. I don't have to share everything with the elders about what's going on with my bank account. On the other hand, I want to be a team player and sort of put things up front so that, everybody, the air is clear and nobody feels like there's anything sort of out of hand that's going on. What are your thoughts on that?
Transparency comes to my mind. I have always felt personally, and it's worked seemingly well with me to be transparent. It's not a matter in which the elders or even the members have to know everything that I'm doing. And I have the right to have private time, away time, after hours time, in which I can do pretty much what I want. I've got a friend that is into hunting, loves guns, and he does that after hours, gets up on Saturday morning, something of that nature. He has every right to do that, and he doesn't have to inform the elders of every time he's going to go out hunting. But but in the kind of the passing conversation, uh, you can convey a message without it necessarily being a blatant message, in your face type of message. In other
Mhm.
words, on Sunday, it'd be easy enough for someone to say, I had a great day yesterday. I went out in so and so's farm and on their land and hunted, and it was just awesome to commune with God, to see nature in its rawest form, to see the deer come along, the turkeys, whatever it may be. And I feel like I'm a new man today because of what I enjoyed yesterday. Well, what did I do in doing that? I let them know what I was thing, but I also let them know the benefits of it. In other words, here I am, a human being that sometimes needs to break from the rat race, kind of get out of the pressure cooker,
Yeah.
and just to commune with God and nature. And it makes me a better preacher or teacher as a result.
Hmm. Yeah. And don't you think most people really understand that? I mean, we all hear the horror stories, and I guess maybe some of us have lived them of maybe elders that have unrealistic expectations, or even members that expect you to be available anytime they pick up the phone or stop by the church building.
True.
And even office hours and things like that too. I mean, some leaders are more flexible and others are a little more rigid in terms of the way that goes. But by and large, I think everybody appreciates the fact that you got to get away. You got to have some time where you're not just focused on even something like preaching. And it might sound bad at first, even like Bible study. You got to take a break from studying the Bible, even because otherwise, it's not gonna be healthy for you emotionally and even physically.
It's got to be a team effort.
Yeah.
And the elders or men, if they don't have elders in a congregation,
Hmm.
they need to understand that this preacher, this teacher that stands before us on a regular basis is a human being, has clay feet, and it needs time to refresh and renew and recharge, like the PTP logos tell us, and
Hmm.
like the Light Network encourages us concerning empowering, enlightening, and all of that.
Hmm.
We've got to have that. We've got to have individually that renewing of our minds that is spoken about in God's word about not being conformed to the world, but transforming and renewing our minds in the nature aspect as well as in our family, marital aspect, a good eldership, those that really truly have a finger on the pulse of a man that is serving in the capacity of a preacher. He has a responsibility to be there for his wife, time with her, special one on one time to maintain that marriage in the highest level as possible. He has an obligation as a father to be with those children, to teach, out playing ball, fishing, whatever it may be, just to have one on one time to let them know that their dad puts them first at that moment. All of that's necessary. Then you take, here he's a preacher, but then maybe he has to take on another gig for a little extra income, and then he has to be a father and a husband all at the same time. It's a juggling act at times to
Hmm.
try to get it all done with the same fervor of spirit that we are as a preacher in the pulpit.
Hmm. I appreciate that. I want us to talk maybe a little bit in just a second or two about work ethic and what motivates even to extend through some of those long hours that a side gig even might necessitate. Before we get there, though, let me just remind you that today's episode of Preachers in Training is brought to you by ETBN. If you've never heard of this before, that's because it's brand new. The Eternal Truth Broadcast Network, a new Christian broadcast network that invites you to join them for their inaugural live broadcast. This episode of Preachers in Training is releasing on Thursday, August the 6th. And if you're listening to this today, then at 7 p.m. tonight, I'm assuming that's Central Time, then you can tune in for the inaugural live broadcast of the Eternal Truth Broadcast Network, covering the Tennessee State primary election. If you're familiar with Brother John DeBerry, then you know the good work that he does, and the Eternal Truth Broadcast Network is his brainchild. And so we're excited to get to tell you a little bit about it today. The broadcast, August the 6th, tonight, 7 p.m., will begin the coverage of one of the most contentious election seasons in American history, with coverage from the Christian center instead of the political extremes that are promoted by the national media. And so tonight's broadcast will include coverage of the polls, interviews and commentary from Tennessee representatives, discussions about the situation in our nation, and so much more. If you want to watch election night coverage and learn more about the exciting launch of this new Christian broadcast network, we invite you to like ETBN on Facebook or join their email list at this website, etbntv.com. etbntv.com. This is an organization created by Christians based in Memphis, Tennessee. Join them tonight, August 6th, 7 p.m. on YouTube, Facebook Live, or on their website, etbntv.com. And you will be a part of the inaugural live broadcast of the Eternal Truth Broadcast Network. Visit their website for times and locations as appropriate for you. We thank Eternal Truth Broadcast Network for sponsoring this episode of Preachers in Training. We're talking to Paul Sain in Season 12, Episode 1 about being a full-time preacher with a side gig. And Paul, one of the things a lot of people know about you is that you are somewhat prone to burning the candle at both ends. Is that a good way to put it?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I, I love the morning hours, always have, and a little bit in recent years, maybe not as fanatical as I have been in times past, but nothing unusual at all for me to be out here at the shop, at the office, at the church building, wherever it may be, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning before the phone starts ringing and so forth. You want to get things for lined up for the day and make sure that you're doing things that you want to do. And I love that. Last night, it was almost 10 o'clock before I left the office because of the opportunity of preaching the gospel. And as far as the internet is concerned. And so again, we do what we want and can do. If we have and I'm not trying to talk about Paul now as much as I am to try to tell you what I hope and pray is what's motivating you. And that is the passion for the work that you have. Dr. Phil, I'm not a big fan of his particularly, but he said something recently that I really, really liked. He said, I love what I do so much that when I lay my head on the pillow at night, I can't hardly wait to get up the next day and start again. Well, that's the type of passion that we've got to have. The work ethic of I've got to put in the time. I cannot take for granted anything. The Lord is not going to speak to us miraculously. I'm not going to be able to speak as the Holy Spirit gives me utterance like those in the first century. I've got to put in the time. I can't take for granted. Let me tell you something. I became aware of this just a few days ago again. It was 30 years ago, approximately. A man by the name of Mike Tyson, a boxer. I'm not a big boxing fan, but I thought this was really cool and interesting. He had already had many bouts. He had won 30 some odd bouts of boxing in a row, most of them knockouts. He went into another round or bout with a man by the name of Buster. Buster was a little bit taller. His arms were a little bit longer. He was extremely well conditioned, as was Mike Tyson. The announcers, as that boxing match began, said, we noticed that Mike does not seem to have the same rigor, the same attack mode as he has had in previous bouts. And he lost the first round. I became a little bit interesting as I was looking at and reading some of it, and come to find out Mike won the second round, but he lost the entire boxing match in the 10th round. And the announcer said over and over, it's almost like he took for granted that he could win. And he lost for the very first time. Now, that's just a little illustration. But friends, preacher friends, we cannot take for granted that we're going to have something really good to present on Sunday in a Bible class or in a sermon unless we put in the time, unless we're at the office, unless we're studying, we're planning, we're searching the scriptures, and we're truly, when we step into the pulpit or the classroom, we are full and overflowing to the point that we can, as Brother Gus Nichols said years and years ago, we can all actually be preaching or teaching from the overflow. We've got to make sure and not take those things for granted.
I appreciate that very much. Sometimes when you're in a position where maybe you've added the side gig because of financial hardship, you're trying to make ends meet, or something along those lines, you can feel a little bitter right? That, well, maybe they ought to be paying me more. Hey, Paul said it on the podcast. They ought to be paying me more. That, maybe if the family's involved in things, it might be time to look and see what doors the Lord might open in terms of opportunities to serve in a different capacity or in another congregation. But what we have to do is to fight off bitterness that would prevent the work from going on. Uh, you sort of addressed that a little bit in what you just said about having that motivation. Anything specifically about sort of fighting off the bitterness or even the burnout? A lot of people in the situation right now, maybe they don't have maybe their side gig is trying to tread water in the midst of a global pandemic. And, you're not getting paid anymore necessarily as a result of it. But what you are doing is you're recording a lot of more videos for Bible classes or to supplement in different at-home studies, or maybe, visiting has changed. You're not going to the hospital. Instead, you're picking up the phone and trying to call the whole congregation in a month's time or something crazy like that. This is a time when we're all feeling a little burdened. And so maybe this discussion might help in that way as well. How do we fight off that bitterness?
A great question, Robert, and really something that every one of us need to work diligently at maintaining our relationship with God and the fact that I serve the creator of the world.
Hmm.
I'm not just in an accounting firm. I'm not in real estate. I'm not in home building or things. All of those things are honorable occupations, but I'm involved in the greatest work that is possible during this life.
Hmm.
God is my boss.
Mhm.
I mean, I know I work under elderships. I know I'm working for the congregation. They are my brethren, and I want to help and please them any way that I can, if at all possible. But most of all, I've got to keep that relationship of knowing that I serve Him.
Mhm.
And that will help me not to have burnout.
Hmm.
I've got to back up every once in a while and say, let me take inventory. Occasionally, I maybe need to get away. LaDon and I sometime will take an afternoon, maybe go up to Nashville, down to Huntsville. I'm not going to mention that we'll probably go to Rosie's and
I
a
see, why do you got to say that? Come
Mexican
on.
place like you like and all that. But we kind of get all of the crunchies, so to speak, what's pressuring us and what's burdening, what's setting on our shoulders,
Hmm.
and take those off for a little while and just enjoy each other, enjoy a good meal, maybe do a little shopping, whatever. You've got to take a little bit of a break occasionally. You can't stay on the grind nonstop without expecting some type of burn down
Mm-hmm.
or burnout. Now, let me also add that second gig, though. Consider what it is and the reason behind it, and maybe set somewhat of a time limit. Maybe you're going to need to pay off a particular bill, maybe unexpected doctor bills or something of that nature, and wasn't budgeted. It wasn't even on your radar screen at all. So all of a sudden, you take on something extra, but maybe approach it on the basis of, okay, I'm going to do this for 2 months or 3 months, be involved in that. And X amount of dollars hopefully will be raised, and I can get out of that, get back to the main thing.
Hmm.
In other words, to kind of somewhat approach it on the basis of this is not a never ending, ongoing, it's going to be a burden from here on. And realistically, it might go longer than what we thought. But even then, we can kind of renew that commitment and
Hmm.
occasionally take it on and say, I'm going to be all right with this. I'm doing this for my Lord. I'm doing this for my family and for my children. Those are the most important things in my life.
Hmm. I appreciate the aspect of what you do, everything of what you just said, but there was a new aspect that you just introduced, and that was of intentionality. I know why I'm doing this. I've got some kind of benchmark that helps me to know the duration that I'm going to do this. And I think that's important. I mean, not to overly complicate it, but even for like a hobby kind of side gig, the release from the crunchies, as you said a minute ago, to have that intentionality and to maybe even have seasons in your life, quarterly or annually or twice a year or whatever, where you can look back and reflect and say, okay, do I need to continue this activity? Or do I need to shift gears and do something else? Or do I need to spend more time somewhere else and a little less time in this activity, this side gig over here? But to have sort of parameters around it. And maybe it's going to become something, maybe you're kind of watching it and it becomes something that you never dreamed it would. You mentioned that about Sain Publications, and it has become, a big thing in and of itself. But I know that you have purpose behind the things that you do, and we're flexible in terms of God's blessings and what we believe we need to be doing in terms of being stewards of the things He gives to us. But at the same time, we want to be intentional about it.
Absolutely. And as we look at our personal situation, uh, I'm thinking of kind of an application in Scripture in the Old Testament that might be applicable here. David had messed up his life, wanted to build the temple for the Lord, but the Lord said no, and your son's going to do that. And David now, if we go back to First Chronicles chapter 28, we would hear David at a time in his life when he knows that death is not that far away, but he's trying to encourage his son Solomon. And the words of David might really be in our face as well, really an encouragement to us as a preacher to fine tune and focus our attention on the things that's most important. What David told Solomon in First Chronicles 28 was, number one, know God. That's from verse 9. Know who He is. Serve Him with a willing heart and a pure heart and a willing mind. Know that God is all powerful, knows everything. I mean, make sure that you know that God has got a purpose for you. He knows you, just like He looked at Saul and said, he's going to do some great things for me. Well, God's got plans for you as well. And then in verse 10, he kind of summarized it. I love the way he kind of brought it to an end when he said, be strong and do it. Well, all of those things kind of can come back and rejuvenate us. I'm working for God. I need to know God. I know that I want to serve Him acceptably with a pure heart and a willing mind. And I know that He's got a purpose for me, and He knows everything that I'm doing. And I've just got to be strong and do it. Now, that'll help prevent burnout. That'll help me keep myself focused. That'll help me no matter how many years, 5, 10, 15, 30, 50, 60 years of working in this master service, I'm still serving that same God.
Those are good words. I appreciate them very much, and I know the listeners do as well. So we've been talking about side gig, and just let's have an opportunity maybe to wrap up this portion of the conversation. If there's anything else that we need to mention, in my mind, I think we've covered it fairly well. But if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, and then I wanted to tell everybody some stuff about what's going on at Sain Publications that they may not be aware of, some really exciting things. But as we wrap up the conversation about the side gig, parting words that you want to give to the preachers who are listening today.
Don't feel guilty in doing it. Take it on. I mean, if there is a need, like I made mention a moment ago, maybe a medical situation where all of a sudden additional bills are there. I mean, be honorable about it, be transparent about it, but at the same time, be willing to take it on, do what needs to be done at that particular time, and trust in God. I mean, God used busy people. He often called those that were already overloaded to begin with for something else that needed to be accomplished. And now in your life, maybe something else needs to be accomplished. And don't be ashamed. Don't be hesitant to do it. Just dive into it, be strong, and get it done.
I love that. That is wonderful. Preaching, being a full-time preacher with a side gig. Lots of wisdom today from my friend, Paul Sain. SainPublications.com. There's a lot of things that are going on over there these days, including some new things that have just been released this week, right?
It's really strange times. And how many times have we said that or something similar to that? And
Right.
I mean, since February, March, and coronavirus and all, we at Sain Publications, I guess I should have anticipated a collapse more than I did. But when congregations ceased having Bible classes, One of the areas that we have the greatest involvement in the brotherhood is our Bible class material called Studying Through the Bible. And then couple that with evangelistic products where we're teaching the lost and churches buy a lot of things like that. Well, that just fell off of a cliff in February, March. I mean,
Mhm.
just went from 100 mile an hour to stopped. And
And
I
still
never
hasn't even recovered, right? I mean,
know. In fact, it is minimal as far as what we're involved in doing right now, because still many congregations are not having their Bible classes, or
mhm.
in very limited numbers. Those that have had 200 maybe have 50 or 60
Hmm.
that are actually coming because many are compromised health, etc. Now, that being said, we are trying to make products available that can still do the Father's work. What our charge is, going into all the world and preaching the gospel, teaching those, edifying one another, helping those that are less fortunate. We're
Mhm.
trying to make those products available that will maintain or help us maintain our works in the kingdom of God. But then there's another area that you and I have worked on even in recent days, that is focusing on the homes, especially those that are homeschooling their children and looking for products that might help them accomplish that end result.
Hmm.
Or maybe those that are not homeschooling per se, but find their children at home more now and are looking for ways to channel their efforts
Hmm.
in a biblical way and a teaching way to draw them closer to God and teach them more of God's word. And thus, we have prepared some bundles, we're calling them that for lack of a better term, that focuses in on the preschoolers, that focuses on another category of grades 1, 2, and 3. Another department is grades 4, 5, and 6. And another department is the teen. And we've got them on our website. They're called Homeschooling Bundles. There's two different bundles for each of those four departments. And it makes it possible for you to have this kind of, it's almost like a collage of materials that will help you to teach your children God's word and help them help the homeschoolers to do the same thing to accomplish the end result of bringing up our children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, as Paul told the Ephesian brethren.
Hmm.
And we're trying to couple or work with you to accomplish that.
Mm, that is some really, really cool stuff. You need to go and check that out. Sainpublications.com, SAIN publications.com. There'll be a link in our show notes as well. Look for Preachers in Training Season 12, Episode 1, and we're going to continue to make you aware of those things in our Preachers in Training Facebook group, as well as in continued episodes here on the Light Network. We're looking forward to that as well. Homeschool bundles. It's at least 4, 5, sometimes 6, even more than that, different items. And that's one of those items includes some anywhere between 90 to 150 or even more of the studying through the Bible lesson sheets, which traditionally, right, have been used in a classroom setting. But it occurs to me those would be fantastic in the home. I mean, for maybe a child's Bible curriculum for homeschool, or even just for family devotionals and that sort of thing, too.
It's really been extremely exciting to hear from homeschooling families. And we've heard from them for months and months, actually, long before the coronavirus hit. But those parents that took seriously the teaching their children about math and English and history and things of that nature, but also integrated a Bible subject in there and made it a part of their learning as well. And these individual lesson sheets, there's 768 of them altogether
Oh, is that
through the
all?
preschool, primary, and intermediate. There's 768, 11 by 17 folded sheets that are involved in this series.
Wow. All right. Well, that is fantastic. Homeschool bundles for preschoolers all the way up through high schoolers, the teenage groups, and everybody in between. SanePublications.com. And while you're on their website, be sure to check out the rest of the stuff that's available there as well, including, of course, the staple. You've got this, right? Ready Reference for Growing Christians.
Yes, sir.
If you're looking for the one to the book that you need to give to new Christians or to graduating high schoolers or college students, if they don't already have it, that's the staple. That's the one you got to get.
It's the main book that we've had, and it came about so haphazardly back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was just a filing system, but it developed into a little book to begin with and became the standard edition, and now pocket edition, now a hardback edition as well. And even recently, what we call the QR cards, the quick reference cards, that is kind of an offshoot of the ready reference material, as literally these. These 4-inch wide, 8.5-inch tall, front and back, full color, and they focus in on a single topic. So all of these are tools, the books, kind of as you refer to, the staple, the main standard item. And Robert, you've been a part of so much of this as we've worked together in previous years and now for the last several years, even apart. And it's exciting to have team members such as you that are teaching these things and really doing a great, great thing.
Well, we appreciate the work that you've done in this as well. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And thank you for all that you do with this side gig, as we maybe facetiously refer to it now, to bless the brotherhood. We appreciate it very much.
Have you ever heard the phrase, the tail is wagging the dog?
Yes.
Sometimes the side gig can also overtake us and really control us, but that's a good thing. Let me make one more suggestion. There's nothing wrong with accounting, woodworking, computer working, any other side gig that you have. But there's a lot of ways in which you can, as a servant of the Lord, a full-time preacher, and then take on something as a side gig that can be spiritual and spiritually benefiting to the brotherhood. Maybe you have some material that you have written, a class book or something of that nature, that you can develop and even make some additional income, or maybe ways in which you can spiritually benefit the brotherhood. I received an email just yesterday afternoon from a dear friend, 500-600 miles away from here. And he had written some material some years ago, ran across it, has now developed it, and he's wanting to put it into some type of form for the brother. And I thought, how cool is that? Because I know him and know the good work that he has done in so many areas. So if you're going to take on another gig, so to speak, then maybe, if possible, do it in a spiritual direction, and thus you're serving the master even more.
Yeah, that's right. And what a great time to do that with blogs and YouTube and Facebook, and you insert it here. There's a wonderful opportunity to do that. And it's amazing how sometimes tinkering with those sorts of things can also be a fun escape as well. Podcasts, by the way, maybe I should mention those.
Well, I have that written down here, and I failed to mention that, but just think how that started. What, 12 years ago or more? Probably the idea developed even before that. And look at what TLN has become, and the people by the thousands that you reach. Again, an idea that comes to our mind that blossoms into something that can serve the brotherhood and further the message getting out to the whole world. What an awesome thing.
Wow. And to God be the glory for whatever good can be done. That's absolutely right.
True.
We appreciate so much you listening to this edition or watching this edition of Preachers in Training. Let me remind you that you can subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Search for Preachers in Training. Hit that subscribe button, and you'll receive it on your mobile device or on your computer every time we release a new episode, which incidentally happens every Thursday, except for during the summers when we take a little break. This is Season 12, Episode 1. We have 19 more episodes, the Lord willing, to come, and we're excited for you to hear all of those. Let me also tell you that we're releasing a video version of these on YouTube. If you search for The Light Network or Preachers in Training on YouTube, you'll see us there as well. And I encourage you, if you prefer to watch it, I don't know why you would prefer, at least for my part of this show, to watch rather than listen. But
especially considering all that new growth that you've got on your
face. You had to get it in there,
so
didn't
cool.
you? If you prefer to see what it is that Paul is talking about, go to YouTube and hit that subscribe button, and you'll receive the video version of the show, which will release every Thursday as well.
Let me throw my 2 cents in also about Brother DeBerry and the exciting thing that they are launching in a few days. And in fact, I think it's today, later tonight, when it's going to actually air. I have such love and respect for that great soldier of the cross, and he has things to say that needs to be heard by the entire world. And let's spread this news about this new broadcast and make it really splash great tonight with great benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. etbntv.com. Link to that in our show notes as well. TheLightNetwork.tv is our website. You can find Preachers in Training and all of our archived episodes, over 200 of them now. And in addition to that, you can also find the other podcasts that are available every weekday from TheLightNetwork.tv. 10 or 11 brand new podcast episodes every week that release from there. And, of course, those are available in all the different formats as well. We are so appreciative of you being a part of Preachers in Training. Next week, Richard Harp joins me to discuss producing digital content. You don't want to miss it. Until then, I'm Robert Hatfield. Let's go preach the word.